Today, we are focusing this morning on demystifying job ads and researching employers, which I think are quite interesting parts of the job search. They're interesting in that they use skill sets that you have already in terms of your research and critical thinking and aspects that you use on a day-to-day basis. And so these should hopefully be skills that you can apply in different settings moving forward as part of this process. Let me introduce myself and my co-pilot today. So I'm Dr. Joseph Barber, leading the team that serves graduate students and postdocs across 7 of Penn's schools. I'm joined in the background by Marianne, who'll be letting people in and saying hello in the chat and sharing links. Marianne, do you want to say a quick hello?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
As I was thinking about the topic of demystifying job ads in particular, the 2 areas sort of struck me as things that are important to focus on, right? So obviously, as you look at the jobs that are out there, you may come across a position, you're like, well, what does this position mean? And am I a good fit for this? And how do I create a narrative that fits for that? And so the job ad itself provides a lot of information that you can leverage. As we'll see going forward, the people aspect of it, the networking, the things that you can learn from people that you're engaging with through your networks will also be really critical to understanding what these job ads are really trying to get to. So if we try to sort of picture, keeping with our icebreaker theme, the job description itself is just a very small part of the process, right? So that does not give you insight into the whole organization or the department or the division or their projects or the industry as a whole. It's very much just a point in time, one role, one aspect of a bigger scheme, a bigger process. And so it shouldn't be surprising that the job description by itself isn't going to give you all the information that you need. Underneath that, all that, the sort of the bigger picture understanding of what's going on in terms of the organization and the industry and everything like that, that's what you're going to need to get from engaging with people in different ways. And that can be a little bit of online research, but a lot of that's going to be engaging with people. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like moving forward. So if we take then the 2 sort of processes here, looking at the job description and sort of doing the research into industries, the skills that you're going to use to sort of do that are really sort of somewhat different skills, right? So as you look at the job description, rather than just going, oh, this is a job I should be applying for, this is something I can do right now, I think it's going to be important to be much more critical and thinking about the language that they're using in the job description and why they're using that language and why that's important and what you can do with that. And we'll sort of go through some examples today of what that will look like in terms of really picking out some of those keywords and playing around with them. And then that bigger aspect of it, finding more about the industries and the career fields, that's going to be your exploration skills that you're going to be using. That's what we're focusing on all this week, different ways of sort of thinking about that. And your networking skills, how to start conversations, how to ask the right questions, how to develop these relationships that are going to be helpful. That's going to give you sort of the critical mass in terms of figuring out what's going on so that you can better understand jobs and then can better position yourself for those positions, for those roles when you're applying to them. So our first sort of goal is to understand sort of the nature of job descriptions that you may come across. And obviously, you can search anywhere and look online and you'll find a job description, but they're typically fairly structured types of narratives. And there's sort of 3 main parts to a job description. The sort of the first main part of the job description is really the sort of the hiring manager saying, this is what we need the person to be able to do. Right. So this is a role that needs to be done. There are things that need to happen. My life needs to be made easier because someone needs to do all these things. These are the list of things that people need to do. The next section is, these are the skills that people need to bring to the role, right? So you need to do these things. And in order to do these things, you need to have a suite, a range, a diverse collection of skills to do that. Now, not all those skills are equally important for every role, but amongst all the skills that are listed, these are the things that are going to make you successful doing the roles. And then the sort of the final part of the job description is, why would the candidate want to work here? What can we sell about our organization, our office, our division, whatever it is, to help them be excited about using their skills with us there? So those are the sort of the 3 main parts of the job description. In terms of the priority that they're given, usually the roles and responsibilities that people need to be able to do on a day-to-day basis, those take up the majority of the job description. The skills are going to be sort of the lesser part. And obviously the the why should you work with us sort of is the smallest part, because at the end of the day, the hiring manager really just needs you, in terms of their priority, to be able to do the job first. So there's no point in sort of getting you really excited about working for an organization if you can't actually do the job. So that's sort of the way that these things are prioritized, so that as you think about the job description, this is what you should be looking for moving forward. If you were to imagine trying to write a job description for a PhD student, the process that you would go to say to yourself, what does the student need to be able to do? This is the same process that a hiring committee or a hiring manager or the office as a whole is going to go through itself. So you're going to think in your head about all the things that you do on a day-to-day basis, and you're going to say, well, how can I put those into easy to describe statements that demonstrate what people need to be doing. So here was a list that I came up with, just off the top of my head, and I encourage you to throw into the chat other things that you think a PhD needs to be able to do. These are the roles and the responsibilities that are sort of important to do a PhD effectively. Now, sort of a good very general rule of thumb when you're looking at a job description is that if you can do about 60 to 70% of what's listed, then it's probably still a good fit for you in terms of applying for that role. So, many people look at job descriptions, they're like, well, I don't know what that is, or I haven't done that, can I apply for this? And the answer is usually yes, if you can make a good argument that you are a fast learner, or that you have lots of experience learning new things quickly, for example. But it kind of also depends on what that 70% focuses on. So if in this job description here for a PhD, the candidate coming in is great at teaching and great at writing grants, but really cannot do research. If the 70% that they can do covers the teaching and the grant writing, but not the research, which is probably the real main part of the PhD experience, then the position isn't necessarily going to be a good fit. Right. So you have to sort of think about where your overlap is and where your overlap isn't, to sort of begin to piece out which of these opportunities might be a good fit moving forward. It also gives you an opportunity, if you do sort of an assessment of where your skills match these skills, of what you can be building over time. This is why we often suggest that people look at job descriptions, even if you're not actively applying, because they're going to give you some insight into what you can be working on in terms of building your own skills moving forward. Those are the roles and responsibilities of being a PhD student. Here then are some of the skills that are necessary to be successful as a PhD student. And again, there's lots more skills here than I had for sort of particular roles and responsibilities, because skills are, can be broken into smaller components rather than the broader, teaching. Teaching is a broad umbrella term for lots of different skills that are important. So that's why typically you might see sort of a longer list of skills that sometimes don't directly match the role. And I think that's going to be interesting too, because some of the things that I've highlighted here in the skills don't actually make obvious sense why they are critical if you look just at that list of roles and responsibilities, right? So you're like, ability to negotiate difficult conversations. Why would I need to do that if I'm just doing research on a particular topic? And obviously you need to do that because within a PhD experience, your relationship with your thesis committee, with your advisor, those things can be critically important to your role. And sometimes they're the hardest things to manage as part of a PhD. And sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not so good. And so the ability to negotiate difficult conversations is actually a skill that you need to be successful, even though it doesn't seem apparent from the roles and responsibilities itself, right? So all of these things are going to be critical. The highlighted ones are going to be especially critical, even if they don't necessarily directly connect to those roles and responsibilities. So this is a thing to bear in mind too, in terms of, as you're looking at the skills of a job description, knowing why those skills might be there, or if you don't know why those skills might be there, that's a sort of a suggestion that you might be able to do some more research into that industry or that organization to figure out why those skills are being asked for. Why do they say you need to be able to comfortable in an ambiguous environment? What on earth does an ambiguous environment mean? And who can give you some insight into why ambiguous environments occur more commonly in one type of industry versus another, for example. So these are just sort of ways to begin to sort of think about these different dimensions. Now, what I did to sort of kick us off for our sort of walkthrough of different job descriptions, obviously I just went through onto the LinkedIn jobs board, and because I was not feeling particularly creative, I just threw in the word humanities as a keyword. And you can see here a bunch of things popped up that somewhere in the job description, the word humanities come up. Maybe you're teaching it, maybe you need a background in it. Again, this is a great sort of exercise for you not to use a broad keyword like social sciences or humanities, but to begin to break down your own skill sets, your knowledge areas, your experience, the things that you are interested in focusing on, the research that you've done, the topics of your research. Use those as keywords to throw them out into job search engines like this and really get a sense of, who's interested in these skills, how do they frame up their interest in those skill sets, what types of roles, industries, organizations are out there. So that's just a sort of a good best practice as you're beginning to explore different roles out there that might align with a research area that you have or an interest that you have that you want to pursue further. So there's a couple of jobs that I sort of want to work through here that I think are interesting examples of what I've sort of been talking about so far in terms of how you can start picking apart these types of positions. So this first one here is the Director of DEI Education for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I'm going to give you a second just to read through this. But as you're reading through this, feel free to throw into the chat anything that jumps out to you as being important from this. So I'm just going to take a sip of water so I stop talking and let you read this. Okay, so feel free to share anything that sort of jumps out in terms of what is particularly interesting about this role, what you think they are focusing on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sort of walk through some of the different components of this. So first of all, what this page represents are sort of the roles and responsibilities. So on the left, this is sort of the opening paragraph. I cropped out a little bit above this. It's a sort of a broad overview of sort of what this position is all about. And then on the right is really that list of roles and responsibilities that I was talking about. Now, in many cases, and certainly not all cases, and certainly not in all situations, this list of roles and responsibilities is often prioritized by what you'd be actually doing in the role, simply because as you're thinking about putting together a job description, when you say to yourself, well, what does this person need to do? The thing that pops into your head first is usually the biggest priority, right? You don't sort of pick up the most obscure thing first. The thing right at the top of your mind is the thing that you really want this person to do. So generally speaking, if you look at these types of roles and responsibilities, you can think about those first few bullet points as the main priorities of the role. And you then want to be able to reflect in your application materials those particular elements of the role, if you're applying for this role, to make sure that you've addressed those first. So that priority there can help you sort of help guide your own decision making as you're focusing on different aspects of your experience. Now, let's pull out some of the keywords here that I think are part of the critical reading that you want to be doing, right? So the first thing that sort of jumps out to me as I'm reading this is the word dynamic, right? Dynamic is a emotionally rich word, right? It's not something that you can just say, well, yes, I'm very dynamic. It's something that you have to sort of demonstrate through the things that you've done. You've been active at doing something. You've been proactive. You've initiated things, right? So dynamic is a sense of energy. So if you're writing a cover letter, a dynamic cover letter feels very different from just a sort of a less dynamic cover letter, a boring cover letter, a sort of a non-enthusiastic cover letter. So dynamic is a keyword. Then they pulled out 4 keywords here, right? Educator, trainer, strategist, speaker. They've listed them right in that first sentence. Those are the things that they are looking for, right? Those are the guiding frameworks for the way that you want to be putting together your application. That's not necessarily a priority order by itself, although it could be, but those are the keywords that you want to be focusing on as you're sort of creating an application for this role. The other thing I noticed from this is that this is a new office, right? So that means that this is not something that you're going to walk into if you're applying for this role and have a pre-constructed set of roles and responsibilities. They're looking for someone who is comfortable innovating, who is comfortable in an environment where there's not a lot of oversight in terms of what needs to happen on day 1 and day 2. They're looking for someone who has the ability to create a vision for what it could look like, the potential for what this could be, not just doing what's already there. And so as you're thinking about your own background, making sure that you're able to then pull out things that you have started, initiated, where you have been in a role where there's been no sort of instructions before, whether that's a research role or other role, where you can really point to being comfortable in that environment, right? So that new office aspect is going to be very important. This role is an inward-facing consultant for state agencies. Now, to me, what this means, well, first of all, a consultant, is a problem solver. They help people solve their problems in many cases. Inward-facing means that you're doing it within the organization, and that to me means that there's an opportunity here for lots of internal politics to be obstacles, right? People with their own ideas, their own agendas, their own budgets, their own whatever. And this person's going to come in and try to help all these people do good things, probably facing obstacles different obstacles in each case. And so building strong relationships and being able to tailor approaches to different populations and being able to sort of navigate through the politics of a particular sort of entity that has multi-departments or groups, that will be a skill set too that's going to be very important. And then the outward-facing ambassador, right? That's being very overt and very proactive in sort of communicating things. So that's a public-facing role. So anything that you would have done that sort of puts you out there, it could be videos that you've recorded about a initiative that you've been part of, presentations at conferences, right? These are things that they're looking for in this context. So this is just a way of, for this paragraph, of breaking down some of those elements. Let's move on then to the sort of those roles and responsibilities, right? So looking at the priority that they have, leading and coordinating training, creating and delivering training, right? These are the things that they really want in the most important aspects of the role that you're applying to. And so the way that you position yourself for those roles needs to have these priorities in mind so that people can really see that that this is what they're looking for. So this, obviously training and education, creating courses, creating curricula, creating mentoring approaches, tutoring people, these are all similar things. But obviously the more that you can demonstrate in this particular role that you've done it to different audiences, the better off you're going to be if you're applying for this one. Formulating strategies and tactics, right? Strategic thinking, we always talk about this as a skill set. PhDs have it a lot because you have to have a strategy to be successful in your research, but you have to be able to use that language too. I don't think when you're talking to an advisor, you often talk about strategic thinking or a strategy for your research, right? The language isn't common in terms of the way that people describe what they're doing, but it is actually really critical. So making sure that you've highlighted the way of thinking about what the first step is, what the next step is, what the 5 steps down the line is, what 2 years down the road looks like, right? The strategy is having a long-term plan that has a very goal-focused approach in mind. So these are things to be bearing in mind. Mentoring and guiding teams, professional development, working as a change agent, right? So these are things that are falling further down the list. They're very important to the role, but they're not things that if you've only mentored your team's professional development is going to get you the interview for the job, right? So if you're a strong mentor, but you can't lead training programs, it doesn't matter how strong a mentor you are. The mentoring, the change agent, they're not icing on the cake in this case. They're still important, but they're kind of more like the icing on the cake because they are critical, but that they don't take up the majority of the time that you would spend in this role. Here are the skills that were listed then. So I talked about the skills that are needed. And obviously this is not a priority list here because possessing a valid driver's license is the third skill listed, but obviously is not the main thing that you would need to have. Obviously you should have that to be successful because you'll be driving around, but that's not what they're judging on to get the interview. So we can sort of break this down again, right? So they're asking for a graduate degree. They don't care necessarily what that graduate degree is because they haven't made any sort of aspects there. They're also looking for someone with 5 to 10 years of training or education experience. And your PhD is a perfect representation of 5 years of education experience, right? So in between everything else that you may have done on top of the PhD, you can sell your PhD as educational experience in this way. And the graduate degree is valuable for being a graduate degree, not because it's a particular discipline or focus area. So in many cases, a PhD makes you seem fancier to people who don't have PhDs, because it's a lot of investment in thought and knowledge and experience. And in this role where you're working with different agencies and they need you to be an outward ambassador, having the PhD is a sign that you bring a sort of a seriousness to the role itself, right? You have a strong academic background, you understand these things. So in this case, that's one of the things that they're looking for. They are looking for someone who's able to do dynamic and compelling speaking and writing, right? So it's hard to, again, just say that you can do that, but in a cover letter, obviously you need to illustrate that you can do that, right? So dynamic writing is important to get people excited about what you bring, not to, not to bore them with a long list of sort of unenthusiastic statements about yourself. So the illustration of how you can be a dynamic writer can come in the cover letter in this context. When you're looking at the skills section, you see words like proven or demonstrated. These are sort of flags that you should pay attention to, because they're looking for obviously a demonstration, an illustration of these things in action. So when you're thinking about your resume and your cover letter, these are the things that you really want to make sure come to the forefront, right? So you can't just say, oh yes, I have experience building partnerships, because that's not a demonstration, right? A demonstration is saying, as part of this project, I initiated relationships with 2 key executive members of this organization, and now we've had a 5-year partnership that's resulted in 3 shared conference environments or something along those lines. So the demonstration has to be much more than just a statement of I can do it. It has to be an illustration of how you've done it and what that's looked like. That's going to be critically important as you're going through these things. So you can see here lots of demonstrated things that they need you to do. Demonstrated experience creating change. Change can be within your department. Change can be within your own academic field. Change can be within a student group. Lots of things can be changed. You just need to sort of give some thought about what that would look like in this context. So that's one position. The second position that I wanted to walk through then is this one. It's a writer at Brainpop to join their content team. I'll take my sip of water and let you read through this for a second. Now, the previous position talked about being dynamic, right? And this one has similarly emotive language, intellectually voracious, communicate a love for learning through joyful prose. So, these are things to pay attention to, because they are important. They're important about the role. They're important about what type of culture the organization has, but they're really important in terms of how you want to present yourself, because they're telling you what they're looking for, right? They're saying these things are important and we need to see an illustration of that for us to be excited about you. So the language that they're using has been well crafted and well thought through and has been edited and reviewed by multiple people before it goes out. So it's important to pay attention to those. So again, these are the roles and responsibilities of this particular position. So I'm going to pull out some of the things that I see from this that are going to be important. First of all, they say they want you to join a team, right? So that means that this is has an opportunity for collaborative work. So as you think about your own experiences, you'd want to make sure that you're prioritizing team-based approaches to some of these things. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll be working always in a team in this role. You could be doing stuff independently, but chances are, because the way that they frame it straight away in that, that first sentence, the team aspect of the work is going to be important. Intellectually voracious, right? Again, it's hard to say in the cover letter, voraciously read books, or, I'm definitely intellectually voracious, but you have to think about what's an illustration of what that looks like. That means, potentially being someone who has tackled multiple subject areas, who outside of their research also does other sort of research related stuff and has interest beyond just the thing that they have to do as part of their PhD, right? So these I think are sort of ways for you to start thinking about, well, how can I illustrate this type of concept without just saying, oh yes, I'm definitely that. Communicate a love of learning by joyful prose. So again, if we think about what the cover letter does, the resume is a pretty boring document, right? You can't really create a bullet point that says excitedly completed research, because that sounds kind of weird. But the cover letter is a narrative document that allows you to be much more dynamic. And so if you can, really excite people by your joyful prose in the cover letter, you will have done a great job of securing yourself sort of a point in their brain that says, we should probably interview this person. The position is demanding and iterative. There's going to be lots of writing and drafting and editing. And all of these things, as we'll see, this position does not ask for a particular graduate level, are things obviously that you've done as part of your PhD and are doing as part of your PhD. You just need to be able to illustrate and verbalize those things and not just say, oh yes, I'm doing research, right? Because sometimes the umbrella term for a PhD is, well, I'm researching, but that's so many different skill sets that are valuable there. Understanding and being able to research a broad range of topics, right? So this is where your just sort of general interest as part of your research, you've covered all of these different aspects of this topic, or you've done literature reviews that help you explore the different dimensions, right? These are the things that can come alive. Explain complex ideas simply. Now, unfortunately, this isn't always a skill set that PhDs have naturally, because the whole academic setup is meant to, it encourages you to sound overly complex in the way that you're describing your thesis, right? So this is something that you have to be able to work on and practice, being able to break down your own research into simple concepts. But the other one, going through multiple revisions as a skill, as a role and responsibility, that's a thing that PhDs can do every day, 5 times a day, 50 times a day. I don't know. It's an ongoing thing, right? So it's easy to be able to highlight that one. Work with animators, right? It's very unlikely that anyone in their role has necessarily done that, but you can begin to think about, well, when have you sort of tried to visualize some of the work that you've done out there? Maybe there's a website that you've created, maybe there's a video that you've created, right? These are things that you could potentially focus on there. Here are the skills necessary for this particular role too. So let's walk through some of these elements here. Attention to detail. So what that means when I see attention to detail is that your resume and cover letter have to be flawless in their formatting and their spelling and their grammar, right? Because if you can say, if you say, here's my application for this job, and in your 1 to 2 page document, you have inconsistencies in your formatting and weird spelling, that's not going to be a good illustration that you can do this. So that's a thing to be thinking about. Curious and excited. So again, these are emotional level statements that you have to sort of get behind and come up with explanations for. You have to be a collaborator, a communicator and a collaborator. So again, the words that they're using here, collaborate should be a word that you would want to use in your materials to make sure that comes to life. Make hard things easy, right? If you've ever had to teach non-major undergrads a complex topic and they all look at you with that funny expression that they don't understand anything, but you found a way to communicate that, then you need to talk about that and illustrate that and give an example of what that looks like. Multitasker, provide, and the writing sample, I think, is another thing, right? They ask for a writing sample, one relevant writing sample. This can be something that you write just for this application, right? You don't have to say, well, let me pass in my first chapter of my thesis, right? You can do this. It doesn't have to be long, but it has to illustrate the things that they care about. Now, maybe you have something already that you can send in. Maybe you have something already that you can adapt, or maybe you can send something in that you do just for this application. Depends on how much time you want to commit to it. But these are some of the options that are out there. And then finally, I didn't show this for the other one, but this is that sort of why do you want to work for us section of the job description, right? So our team is made up of all these people: educators, published authors, artists, bakers, cyclists. We value this. We try to offer work-life balance, right? So this is them trying to sell you on the nature of that role. So that's sort of the overview of the job descriptions, just to give you an example of what those look like. If people have questions about the way I sort of approach this, then put those in the chat and we'll sort of address those. But let's sort of then go one step further beyond this, right? So far, here are our takeaways. The words that you're seeing in the descriptions, these are words that you need to understand and break down and think through and think critically about. And then these are also the words that you need to use as you're applying for the positions, if you are applying for them. So you want to use their words to describe your experiences. You've seen that there are some technical type skills. You need to be able to deliver training, but there are also sort of states of being. We need you to be curious and passionate and dynamic. Any word that you see in the job description that is confusing, you really need to understand before you apply for a position, right? So these are just bullets that I pulled out from a wide variety of different jobs doing different things. But there's lots of words here that don't make any sense. Overseas staff with matrix support from other staff, design decision matrix templates that can assist partners to quantify the likelihood of due diligence assets achieving the target product profile. I mean, none of that makes sense to me. Willingness to work in a cross-functional team environment, and this disaster of the last bullet point here. So these are questions or areas that you need to understand, because if you don't know what they are, how can you position yourself for those roles, right? So we can talk about ways to figure out what those things are in just a second. No candidate for any job has everything that's listed. And I think some people get sort of concerned that they don't have everything. That's not going to be a concern. Obviously, you need to talk about the things that you do have and not worry at the time of application about the things that you don't have, because there's nothing you can do to change those right now. But if you can demonstrate that you have these things, you can demonstrate you're flexible, adaptable, that you're quick to learn as part of your other skill sets that you're highlighting, then you're pretty well positioned moving forward. And then, as we saw at the beginning, just the job description by itself is not going to give you all the information that you need to understand the nature of that work, the nature of the role, the nature of the projects, the nature of the challenges that you face. There has to be more that you do. So let's think about ways that you can do that. The first approach is really to do some decent online research. This is sort of part of your literature review of careers that are out there. One of the tools that we subscribe to through Career Services is the Vault Guides, right? These are just general, broad guides of the types of roles and experiences and careers that you can find. And I pulled out ones that are obviously, probably more relevant to you here for this particular presentation or this particular prep camp. So these are all things that you can go through, and they will give you some insights into what's out there. They'll describe some of the nature of these positions, good, easy reading that will sort of give you a solid foundation. You've heard about Imagine PhD a lot so far, but let me talk about some of the things that you can pull from Imagine PhD that can be helpful to do some of this background research, right? So as you go into Imagine PhD and you click under resources, you'll see these job families. These are sort of common paths taken by PhDs in the humanities and social sciences. If you click on one of these, I'm going to click on higher education administration. There are sort of 4 boxes within this section that you can go into, right? There's the Explore box. Under the Explore box, they have a whole bunch of sample job descriptions, right? So this is a very nice, easy way of getting a sense of the types of roles that are out there. And you can see the skills that they highlight and the responsibilities, and you can sort of immerse yourself a little bit more in the range of roles that are out there. Under this Explore category, you might also see narratives from people who've applied for these roles, or even some videos related to that. If we go back to our 4 boxes here and we click on the Apply box, that takes us to a section where you can actually see an analyzed job description, sort of that's broken down, and where the sort of the group has highlighted the key terms, along with a tailored resume that's also annotated to demonstrate how they've matched the skill sets for someone to the role that they've talked through, right? So if you look at the job ad, you'll see that they've just pulled out some of the keywords, just like I did, talked about why they're important, and then they show in the resume that they've attached ways that that sample person has mapped their skills and experiences onto that role with these points in mind. So a very useful thing to play around with. The Versatile PhD is also another tool that sort of does similar things. Obviously, the Versatile PhD, like the name suggests, is all about demonstrating how versatile the PhD is. You can set up your free account through our website. Once you get into the Versatile PhD and you get to the PhD Career Finder tool, again, you'll see the list of paths that are commonly taken by PhDs, in this case in the humanities and social sciences. If I click on University Administration here, on the right, the box pops up where I can see, again, resumes that people have submitted. And these resumes often come with the job description and the cover letter, and sometimes even the old CV that someone used before they turned it into the resume. So very interesting sort of narratives that you can go through. And again, some of these narratives here in terms of how people thought about the position, how they translated their skills, how they made that transition, things that can be very helpful as you're trying to understand the nature of the work that you're applying to. So those are online aspects of what you're going to do. The other aspect is going to be really thinking about, the people side of things, what you can learn from people to help you better understand the nature of these positions. So let's think about that now. We'll go back to our, job as a PhD student. And if you think about it, you could ask yourself, well, what would someone, could be you, what would someone need to ask a current PhD student to figure out the obvious what you need to do and what you do as a PhD, but also the non-obvious, the sort of the stuff that's slightly hidden. What questions could you ask to get at some of that information to figure out if this was a role that you wanted, or to figure out how to position yourself for this role, right? So, because this is basically what you're doing too, right? Right now, as a PhD student, you know all this stuff. People who are in the roles that you may be interested in know all this stuff. You just need to find a way to ask them questions to get at that information. So, going back to this Brainpop writer, right? You could ask lots of questions about this type of role. You could say to yourself, well, do I get to pick the subject that I'm working on? What does the team look like? How does working with animators actually work? Do I need an animation background? How many projects do I work on a regular basis? There's so much that you could that's not necessarily overtly identified from this that you might be able to figure out from doing a little bit more research. So let's think about how to do this, right? So obviously the first thing I would do is I'd go to the website of this place, and I'd go to the About Brainpop, which is usually, if you're trying to find the About, it's usually in the top bar or on the bottom bar, and you can read about them, read about their goals, their initiatives, why they founded themselves, where their priorities lie. That's going to be a sort of an important thing to understand. I'd also then pop over to LinkedIn, and I'd look at their LinkedIn profile, and I'd follow them on LinkedIn if I was interested. And then what that does, it shunts all of their posts that they put on LinkedIn into your LinkedIn feed so that you see more about that. And these mini posts on LinkedIn are great because they're sort of small snippets of things that are going on LinkedIn that you can take a look at, which will give you better insight into the organization and what they might be doing. Now, when you look at a company page on LinkedIn, we talked about the follow side of things. You'll see here on the second arrow is the people tab, right? This allows you to break down the employers at a particular company. All right? And so I did this here. What I did is it creates this sort of interactive database of their employees. And I, under the where they studied category, because there are 6 bits of information: where they live, where they studied, their role, what they studied, their skills, and how you're connected. But where they studied, I put in University of Pennsylvania just to see if there are any Penn alums that work there. And I find that there is one Penn alumna who works there, Lindsay. And I put up her profile. She's an undergraduate alumna from 2005. She is an author of novels. So, they listed in there, who we are. We're cyclists and we're published authors. So this may be one of the published authors. This was a post that Lindsay had written on her profile page. I'm proud to have written the newest Brainpop topic, the Tulsa Race Massacre, published on the 100th anniversary. Now, this says a couple of things. One, obviously, is that this organization is doing serious work in terms of educating, right? This is a hard topic to do. But also, it's something that Lindsay is proud of, right? Lindsay has a whole range of things that she works on, but this is something that is meaningful to her. This is meaningful work to Lindsay because she's sharing it out there to her population. So that gives you a sense then of what might be, the nature of the work and how people think about that work. This is all great information. And then obviously, Lindsay is someone who has information about working at this organization who you share something in common with because she's a Penn alumna. I'm actually a secondary connection with her. So I have someone that I know that knows Lindsay. So if I wanted to reach out to Lindsay, I could leverage that secondary connection. You may have secondary connections too through this, through your own networks. But if I wanted to reach out to Lindsay, then this would be an opportunity to say, hey, Lindsay, I found your profile on LinkedIn. I've seen this position at Brainpop that I'm really excited or interested by. I see that you've been working there. Would you be willing to chat with me about your experience there? That would be so helpful as I prepare my own narrative for my application, right? So this is just a great way of beginning that conversation. And this falls under the category of, what we classify as informational interviewing. The idea of finding someone who's doing a thing that you think you want to do, that you might share some overlap with, and asking them about that so that from the information that you're getting from them, you can better position yourself for that role. Better position yourself by learning new skills that you figure out that you need to learn, or by talking about those skills that you already have in the materials that you eventually use to apply. Right, so these are some of the questions out of many questions that you could ask that will sort of get at some of the information that you might be helpful to you as you're applying for the role, right? You really want to know what the skills that are valued and what the types of projects are and what the types of obstacles are so that you can demonstrate that you have the skills to overcome those obstacles, right? So these informational interviews are always so critical to giving you that insight into the role, right? So the job description is the tip of the iceberg. This really gets you insight into the rest of that iceberg under the water. Now, if you go to the university page on LinkedIn, you can do the same type of thing, right? So you go to the alumni tab, and then you'd see the 169,000 alumni that are out there, broken down by these different categories: where they live, where they work, the role that they play, what they studied, and so on and so on. And so what I did here is I just did the keyword DEI and the greater Philadelphia area. So matching back to that first position that we walked through, I see 2 people in the city of Philadelphia. Now, the other position we looked at was the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. This is the city of Philadelphia, but chances are people who work in DEI initiatives, have a community of people that they are engaging with as part of their work. And so both of these contexts might be people that you could learn more about Pennsylvania's approach to DEI initiatives. They might have some insight into that. They may have contacts who they know within the state government that might be helpful as part of that, right? So very quickly being able to sort through LinkedIn to find people who have answers to the questions that you're looking for. And by having conversations with these people, then you're really going to build a strong knowledge of the position. You're potentially going to build people who can advocate for you should you apply for that position. And you're also going to be able to practice your own narratives. What you say about yourself to these people is practice for what you say about yourself when you actually apply for positions, right? So you can iterate that over time to really hone in on the skills and experiences that are valuable. Now, there is some middle ground between doing online research and talking directly with people, both of which are important. And the thing I want to focus on today is the Aurora platform, because this is new and we are trying to make sure that people are engaging with this. Once you sign into Aurora, you can look at the video library that they have of conversations with people that talk about their roles in different organizations, different industries, right? So it's like someone else having the conversation for you, but you're still gaining the benefit. Now, these career exploration videos are meant to sort of be part of a process, right? So they're not going to give you all the answers, but it's really helpful to sort of think about them in different ways. And you can download the workbook that they have in terms of exploring careers to make sure you're making the most of it. But what I like about the video library is it's not based on job title, right? It's not saying, well, I am X, because you don't know if X is what you want to do. And you may not even know if, X is in the right sort of this right area of what you want to be heading towards. What they've done here is they've broken down these roles, the different jobs that people have, into values and interests that match the imagined PhD ones. So, if you're interested in creativity, they're going to talk about, all the roles that factor in creativity. So it gives you a sort of a broader perspective at looking at these roles that are out there without getting too focused on the job title to begin with. That might not sound attractive to you, but once you learn about the role itself, you might see that it does have skills that you're interested in. So a really great way of breaking this down. Obviously, here I've selected the arts and humanities one that you can take a look at. You can go through the other ones as well to explore that. But a really great resource available to you 24/7, whenever you're available and ready to do that, drinking pina coladas, whatever you're doing, you can do that. Aurora also has recorded webinars that are more about the types of things that I'm talking about, the sort of the process of doing these things, of networking or building that network or whatever it is. So these recorded webinars are always helpful. They will also have some live webinars, so a couple coming up. The overqualified, underqualified question, that's going to be helpful too. Everything that they do is going to be sort of recorded, so eventually you'll be able to see it on the platform. Doing it live, I think, can sometimes be helpful just because you're part of a community there. So do make sure that you attend the launch session for Aurora that we have scheduled on Thursday. Marianne put the link in the chat for that, because learning how to use this tool effectively, I think, is going to be so helpful. As I'm just skipping over different elements of it, but it's really a structured process to help keep you on track. So let's wrap up with just some final thoughts about what all this research and looking at the job description means for your resume. Well, primarily it means that you really do have to adapt your resume for every particular job that's out there, because even if it's the same role at 2 different organizations, the language that they use will be different. The emphasis that they put on different things will be different. The words that they use will be different, right? And you need to be able to reflect that as you're moving forward in your own materials, in your resume, in your cover letter, even in your examples that you're using for your interviews. You can't just repeat what the job asks for. So if the job asks for these top 3 things, you can't just say, oh yes, I have those 3 things, right? That's not a dynamic or engaging illustration or demonstration of your skills and actions. You really need to make sure that you come alive with examples and illustrations of what that looks like. Because if you don't have those illustrations that represent you, the employer has no more information to use to understand if you're going to be a good fit, right? So the purpose of a resume is to allow the reader to picture you doing the thing that you've talked about. And the more that the reader can picture that, the easier it is for them then to superimpose that image onto the role that they're trying to fill in their organization. Many people, who are PhDs often have a teaching experience section, even in a resume, and we sort of walk through this in our one-on-one appointments. Obviously, graded exams and held office hours is exactly what you did in the role in many cases, but most jobs, all jobs won't list these skills as the key things, right? So you need to be more creative in terms of really bringing these things to life by identifying the skills that do resonate with the role that you're applying to, right? So this is a creative process of critically looking at that job description and then reframing your own narratives to do, to sort of make that come to life for the reader, because holding office hours by itself is not something that's going to feel engaging to most roles that you're applying to. But in holding office hours, you have helped students problem solve their issues. You've given creative ways to help people understand topics, right? You've been there for people, you've mentored, you've done all these other things. You have to make that come to life.